Within every genre of video game ever developed by humanity, there is always many games that are overlooked by their more successful brethren. For examples, for your Persona series, you have your Tokyo Xanadus. For your Gran Turismos, there is your Sega GT 2002/Online. For your Fallouts, the good ones, and the Wasteland series, you have an Atom RPG. For your Tomb Raiders and Assassin's Creed games, you have your Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb. For your Grim Fandangos and Telltale's Walking Dead series, you have Beautiful Desolation. And for your Total Wars and other strategy/tactics games, you have this hidden gem. Alongside Kingdom Under Fire, The Crusaders, Tom Clancy's End War, yeah, you get the picture. World in Conflict, a real-time tactics game published by the Swedish studio Massive Studios, known for other titles such as Ground Control and the Tom Clancy's The Division, and published by Ubisoft on the 18th of September 2007. Then 2 years later, World in Conflict's first and only DLC, Soviet Assault, was released in March 2009, exclusively for Windows PCs. Although there were ports planned for the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, yet sadly were cancelled. And I remember that. After watching a preview of the game on some obscure Gaming Sky program, and seeing the great graphics and being awed by the power of the nuclear bomb battlefield ability, I eagerly anticipated for a great strategy game for my Xbox 360. Though that never happened, and the game went into obscurity for me until I finally got a PC a few years later and got the game after many years of waiting. Worth it. Now, this game is fondly remembered by those who have played it in the past, and many are still hoping for a sequel to this beloved and some would say underrated real-time strategy/tactics game, for its unique setting of the Cold War gone hot, and for once go into conventional warfare, rather than the nuclear holocaust that a Third World War setting always devolves to the battles within suburban America, which heavily screams of Red Dawn, the good one, 1983, not that one, and of course, and probably marketed to a vast degree, the utilization of extremely powerful off-map battlefield abilities that reduce suburban America into a construction engineer's sodding nightmare. And the environmentalists. Good work, Lieutenant! But does this game still hold up to this day? Is it still worth anyone's time over more modern tactics strategy games? Yes! Well, according to reviewer polls on GOG, which as of this video is the only way to get this through digital distribution, Steam got rid of it a few years ago, which is really bloody sad. The game's rating stands at 4.6 out of 5. So, let us see the great time-tested strategy of deploying in the same deployment zone repeatedly. Bomb the wrong area because the mouse is a bitch in the moment of battle. And let us hear what many engineers say when they are tasked to rebuild an area destroyed by a battle.
That's gonna take a while to rebuild.
And let us delve into this underrated gem. When one boots up World in Conflict for the first time, one would be struck with awe by how amazing the game looks. Well, about 95% of the visuals anyway. Making use of the MassTech game engine and utilising the Havoc physics engine, this game looks near incredible considering the game's age. It has aged magnificently like a fine wine. The physics, on the other hand, are a little extreme. I mean, just to support it briefly, you hear war stories or hell through accidents of explosions so powerful that heavy-duty vehicles, tanks, or even structures would be thrown up several hundred feet into the air, and then land several kilometers away. In the heat of battle with explosions raining down and with the use of powerful munitions, that would obviously happen, but for a lamppost or a hay bale to be catapulted out of the map because a Humvee just touched it is slightly ridiculous, yet extremely entertaining when witnessed. If there is one thing the graphics engine does better than anything else, especially for a game made during the mid to late 2000s, is detail. Detail is the name of the game, and World in Conflict has played the game better than any other game at the time. Especially for a real-time tactics game where graphics are usually not prioritized over AI competence and pathfinding. This detail is strikingly obvious on the various objects around the map, such as the landscapes and weather, the units you will command and destroy in the field of battle, to the abilities that will tear a new asshole into the terrain already scarred by vehicle tracks and the soldiers' boots. Even the mission loading screens have a nice little touch of utilizing both graphics that look like something used from a 1984 Macintosh, mostly used on map screens detailing the situation, mixed with images that have seemed to have been sketched by an attaché artist nearby, adding an additional viewpoint of the war from someone else on the ground with the combating armies, the civilians stuck in the middle and those higher up. With the many vehicles under your command, you will eventually notice that they are highly detailed with various bullet holes and explosion decals on hit vehicles, as well as sparks and smokes emanating from heavily damaged vehicular units. Yet if you look ever closer at your units, oh and by the way you must be bloody careful when doing so however, why, well I'll tell you later, you can see such tiny amounts of detail. I mean, it is unreal for a game of this age, and especially of this genre. Pilots adjusting themselves in their cockpits, turrets turning in a cautious manner, radio antennas and the vehicle's crews, duffel bags moving in reaction to the unit's movements. And then, when said vehicles are destroyed, instead of just exploding into nothingness or dissolving into the map when the player isn't looking, vehicles lose parts or crash into the ground slightly intact. Such unnecessary detail, yet it adds to the charm and great production value of the game. And the detail doesn't end there. The battlefields you will be reducing the land value of are just wonders to the eye. At least until battle commences. From the urban sprawls of Seattle and New York, the large golden expansive farmlands of rural America, the calm and idealistic small towns of suburban America, to the winter tundra of northern Russia and Scandinavia, as well as the sun-kissed hills and coastlines of the Mediterranean. These maps are just treats for the eye, and like the units themselves, massive studios have put so much unnecessary detail into the maps that would normally be overlooked in other games. Love this game though. Flags flying from buildings, civilians fleeing from the battlefield at the outskirts of a town, cars loaded with valuable possessions or crashed on the side of the road, and billboards advertising their crappy products to the populace. And then, when the Soviets are present, you would see posters brainwashing, or spreading the truth depending on what you think, to the populace, the grim yet iconic Soviet-style apartments with socialist realism artwork decorating the sides, and of course, you would see the Red Star quite prominently throughout the game. Yet, when battle finally erupts, the tranquility of the maps is shattered, both metaphorically and physically, and scarred by the horrors of modern warfare. Terrain is cratered and charred black from explosions, grass and trees burn from fires with malicious glee, and throw up oily and ugly black smoke into the sky. Tank tracks are left imprinted into the ground, and in the background, anti-air gun traces arc across the sky, while planes zip and zap across the battlefield skies and drop their payloads at their intended destinations. Tank formations grace across the landscape with their accompanying support units in a grand display of power. Polluting smoke bloats out of the sky, and on the ground, buildings which receive punishing shots from artillery, rockets, and some such other explosive devices sustain damage, with holes in the walls and slightly charring. But once the building has sustained far too much damage for the structure to no longer stand, it eventually starts to crumble and collapse, caving in on itself and throwing dust and debris into the air. Now, whilst the main characters look great, albeit with near Xbox 360 levels of character detail, and just to add, I personally think the characters look similar in design to Capcom's Dead Rising game from 2006. Anyway, moving on. Yet over the course of the game, you will notice one of two things with the character models. One, they are constantly recycled. Now, like I said earlier, usually the visuals are overlooked with strategy games, emphasizing more priority on the AI pathfinding and being able to manage a good variety of units at once on screen. Yet, when it comes to the cutscenes, it is not hard to notice that the variety of character models are overused more than once. And finally, the main infantry units commanded by the player are very low poly and usually consist of one or two designs, again, used more than once. Now, I've ranted enough about the visuals to conclude that they are amazing, and near enough still holding up to this day, with a few exceptions here and there. But I have plenty more to rant about rather than constantly complimenting on how sexy this game looks. So let's move to sound. I like the sounds of that. Speaking of sound, no, I'm not doing that again. Third time in a row, I'm not doing this again. As for this segment of the review, like my previous Hideki episode, which you can watch here, this will not take too long to dissect and examine. Sound effects, music, and voice acting are the main three sound thingies I will be investigating. All of these three have their strengths and their weaknesses, but only one shall reign supreme over the others for their quality and contribution to making this game a pleasure to not only play, but to listen to as well. And just to enhance the game's quality overall, is the sound effects. Hands down the strongest aspect of the game's sound design. Why? I'll tell you why. You know, during this advertisement campaign, World in Conflict labelled itself as the most intense strategy game ever made? Well, that's true. But marry that statement with the fast-paced gameplay, the sleek and detailed visuals coupled with some spectacular battlefield sound design, and you have a game that truly highlights the massive scope of modern warfare, well, at least from nearly 40 years ago, in terms of the scale of the battles and the destructive power. The sound effects alone are spectacular, added to the impact of artillery strikes, tank cannons firing, and rockets impacting structures or other target coordinates. But it is the explosions from the various battlefield support features that will truly take the crown for truly magnificent explosions in video games. I mean, not all of them. Mortar strikes in comparison are just damp biscuits in comparison to something like a fuel air bomb, for example. These explosions have an almost godlike gravitas. The sight and the sounds combined with the earth-shaking effect give any of these explosions witnesses an almost apocalyptic feel, regardless of its size. From mortars and rifle-launched grenades to airstrikes, artillery strikes and nuclear attacks, these battlefield abilities command respect and awe when used. As well as that, it can also be seen as decisive, especially when an ability is used at the right time and disrupts an enemy's attack. But when one finally zooms out to view the greater battlefield, one can truly appreciate the scale of modern warfare. Yet the ambience kicks the game's detail to an almost godlike level of detail. There is a sense of rush with the constant movement of allied and enemy units and vehicles moving to and from rendezvous points and points of engagement. Then, as the sounds of battle erupt throughout the map, aircraft scream over the distance, deploying troops and vehicles. Muffled explosions crash and rumble in the distance. Jets scream overhead and drop their deadly payloads as they explode or burn everything in their path. Helicopters and their propellers drone overhead. Missiles whoosh and arc towards their intended targets. Whilst on the ground, tank engines growl in anticipation to move on towards their targets, while infantrymen fire their automatic weapons and make small talk on their radios they think aren't being monitored by their superiors. Yet, whilst the sound effects and ambience are something of magnificence and beauty that adds greater clarity and character to the maps, the music is something of a mixed bag. Composed by Ola Strand, known for his work in the previous game Ground Control, the main soundtrack composed is very dramatic, accompanied by fast-paced, bombastic music that sets the tone of whatever is happening on screen.
And air support. Wipe those bastards out for me. I'm leaving it to you, Parker. Keep those strikes coming.
Or moments of the story that is supposed to stir tears, the music slows down and becomes slow and sorrowful to match the sadness of the situation. Or as you prepare for the next mission and get in a debrief.
By blowing the highway bridge, we actually managed to slow the Russians down. For a while. The colonel led us south and we met little resistance along the way, but Bannon and Charlie Company kept lagging behind. Bannon blamed the mud, but we were secretly helping to get away from the colonel.
Each soundtrack is well made and is ideal for any situation in the game. Accompanying this soundtrack is a few official soundtracks. Some real good ones, this Warlord might add. You got Shadow of the Sun from Audioslave, the song used in that famous New York trailer for this game, and it's the best song in the game because, come on, it's Audioslave. Who doesn't love Audioslave? Then you have Trouble Don't Last by Rebecca Newell and Gabriel Mann. Quite an upbeat and good song, by the way, considering the destruction of modern warfare around you.
Shut up!
Then you have some songs from the 1980s. Now, considering the plethora of many smash hits from that time period and the fact that this game is set at the end of the 80s, and the start of the 1990s I must add, you would think there would be more than just 2 songs selected for the entire game. Maybe it is due to copyright, maybe it's due they couldn't get their rights to play certain bands or tracks, or they only had 2 songs ready in time prior to the game's release. It's a little guff considering the choice they had. Yes, guff's a word. First song is White Snake's Here I Go Again, a classic song and a good choice for the game. Then there's Tears for Fears, Everybody Wants to Rule the World. Again, another classic song that makes me feel nostalgic for a time period I never lived in, and I consider very overrated. But of all the good gods, this song is played constantly. If you keep your ears open, you will hear it. Anyways, moving on to the last bit of the sound segment. Voice acting. And what can I say? The voice acting is fantastic.
But what if your orders are wrong? If you act without my consent again, I will have you court-martialed and sent home in shame. Is that understood?
Take up defensive positions, Bannon. That's a direct order. But sir, we can't hold. If you run, I'll shoot you myself. Now rally your company.
Our failure at Cascade Falls looked like a Cub Scout picnic.
But we didn't fail at Cascade Falls, sir.
When I'm forced to sacrifice a company of my men and drop a nuclear weapon on my own country, call it a goddamn failure. I won't let it happen again.
Many of the cutscenes and pre-level narrations are just well acted, adding a sense of authenticity and production value to an already near-perfect game.
I wouldn't get my hopes up, sir.
Order those battalions to attack, General. And if they fail, as a last resort, order the nuclear strike.
Mr. President, I'm sorry that it's come to this.
Sorry. Yeah. That's all, General.
Everything from the main characters, Parker himself, voiced by the amazing Alec Baldwin,
Lighted by the many fires downtown. Some have later called the retreat organized, but I think it only seemed that way because we were all running in the same direction. Seattle was lost the moment those ships entered the harbor.
cutscene-only characters, and even the units and tactical aid radio chatter is top-notch.
Your command to our infantry! Атакуйте! Fire your rifle fire at the target! Where do you need us? But now to attack the enemy! The squad, we are on the move. Yeah, got it! We're in a tight spot! Return fire! Get last push long! Move faster! What do you want, sir?
Roger, Wilco. Joker switching to missile. Copy that. Airborne infantry inbound. Bomb delivered on target. Wolverine out.
And the same can be said for the Russians, even if they do speak English.
Mind the road, comrade.
Yet with this quality of voice acting in the game, when they do drop the ball with line delivery, it is extremely noticeable and stands out like a sore thumb.
Are you serious, Captain? Ah! The Kingdom just got totally razed by artillery! Those civilians were damn lucky I was around to save their butts. Whoa! That's some explosion!
You're right, Captain. Using the woods would help us retain the element of surprise.
Now I have talked enough about the sound design, let's move on to the gameplay. But before that, hey, do you want to hear the most distressing sound in the game?
Hey, Case, engage now! Move your feet! We got some...
Ah, gameplay, the most important aspect of any video game. I mean, it would be pretty shit for a real-time tactics game to have no control or gameplay whatsoever where command and control are literally needed to succeed. Anyways, this game is a very fast-paced and quite intense real-time tactics game, more in line with such games as Tom Clancy's Endwar, probably that game more than anything else. I mean, look at these two side by side, it's almost astonishing really how closely linked they are. Homeworld, and the recently aforementioned Ground Control, rather than games like Company of Heroes, Command & Conquer or your Total War series. Rather than building a base, collect resources, build troops or control a massive empire, I mean, obviously, to gain resources to destroy your enemy, here, you deploy your troops in real time and using unit-specific abilities, you have the main objective in the campaign, as both NATO and the Soviets, to capture and hold certain points across the battle map, which are indicated within the green circles on the map. You will notice that you will be doing this nearly all the time, to the point of being formulaic and repetitive. Yet, more than anything, you will be more focused on finishing the objective as efficiently as possible, as taking your eyes off your units usually means death. More on that later. Moving
The
on.
Legion is in...
What?
Holding on to these capture points increases the defensive abilities around the area, with anti-tank, infantry and air turrets, but with more units within the capture points, the emplacements are built at a faster rate. But to enhance the challenge of the game, you will be given secondary objectives to complete on the side. Mostly they'll involve the destruction of a structure or a unit or aiding an ally with an ability like fixing them for example, or it could just simply involve taking another area from the enemies. But this comes at the price of splitting up your units into smaller striker groups, or sending a single unit to fix or occupy something. But hey, if you accomplish it, you get a medal and praise.
You move fast, Parker. I'm detailing an M1 tank to you. Put it to good use.
If not, then you get scolded.
Lucky I finally got hold of some anti-air assets, Parker, since you couldn't handle it.
Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck your ass!
So, motivation for finishing objectives. So, what is it like to fight the AI in this game? Not too bad actually. Now don't get me wrong, when someone first plays this game for the first time, fighting the AI in this game can be seen as quite intimidating and everything is moving too fast for a new player to compute. This game's AI does have a tendency of sending massive waves of hostiles towards the player, mostly consisting of armoured vehicles and tanks with some anti-air vehicles or infantry and helicopters in support. This can be seen during the last mission where the Soviets just sent wave after wave of tanks and helicopters to remove you from your defensive positions. Yet if you really look deeper into the AI's logic, there are plenty of loopholes you can use to your advantage into beating this game. The AI is not smart, hell no. They may use numbers to their advantage, as well as limited battlefield support like helicopters and some artillery, but you will notice something. They will attack in the same direction every bloody time, and they will deploy in the same deployment zone. Every time. Yet being a strategic clever clogs, you can use this to your advantage. By using good unit placement and using the correct tactical aid, you can destroy or stop an enemy advance or render their defenses useless to your inevitable victory. Yet the AI will have an annoying tendency of almost sneaking up on your units and destroying certain units, resulting in a distressing lost unit sound effect and screaming at the screen, looking at you anti-tank units. But of course, you could do the same to the enemy, but still, it's fucking annoying when it happens to you. Now, as you keep playing the game, you will notice on the top left and right corners of the screen you will see two buttons. On the top right, you will have your reinforcements. At first, you have a set number of points to spend to build up your forces, so you need to balance firepower with tactical flexibility. Of course, the best units are the most expensive, so again, you need to balance a mixture. But if you use your units to their strengths, they could be as effective as the most heavily armoured or heavily armed tank. But how do you gain points back, I hear most of you say? Simple, by killing the enemy.
He's some American lead, you son of a bitch!
We got a nice hit on that vehicle.
Unlike most games, you do not build a base to recruit and then deploy your units, but you deploy them in real time in a rather spectacular way of being airdropped or paradropped. Adds to the fast pace and intense gameplay. But of course, you can't deploy your troops anywhere. By pressing the M key, you open the map and you may notice a greenish netted mesh on certain sectors of the map, mostly near your current position. This is where you can deploy your units and reinforcements, but this could be used in your tactics if you're cleverer than I. But on the top left is your tactical support, the bread and butter of your game and one of the most celebrated features of this game. And once you see the destruction and the destructive majesty given to you, I'm sure you would agree. Like your unit points, you too have up to 100 points to spend on tactical aid that is mostly made available to you throughout most missions, ranging from non-destructive abilities like your building bridges, recon and new units deployments, selective strikes like napalm strikes and air support, to the massive indiscriminate strikes like heavy artillery barrages and nuclear strikes. There are many flavours of destruction to be wreaked on the battlefield. However, you won't be able to have all of them at once. Depending on the mission, you may only have a selected few, but you get to use them up to 3 times before a recharge period of up to a minute before using them again. However, if you use the same ability, it costs an increased number of points to do so. And like with reinforcement points, you gain more points by killing enemy units with your abilities. Of course, being a tactics game, you will have units to command, to tell who to kill or where to move, or your number one priority, not to get killed due to your not so stellar command, or your unit's lack of preservation of itself. I mean, look at this. It's either that or they never engage the enemy until they are right in front of their grill. Yeah, rule number 1 in this game, never ever let your eyes off any of your units in the game. I mean, you can see this from the gameplay recording on screen, so sorry for the tiny number of grandiose shots in this review. As I said before, your unit's lack of preservation is just outstanding. Speaking of rules, rule number 2, don't let the mouse ruin your use of tactical aid. The mouse is quite sensitive on the few of those abilities, especially the airstrikes. There's nothing worse than lining up to the strike and then the mouse sensitivity pushes the strike way off course and then you bomb the Space Needle. That has happened. Oh yeah, and rule number 3, respect the hind, goddammit. Anyway, not meaning to diverge from discussing units, let's talk about units. Now there are up to 20 units to command in the game. Well, according to the manual anyway, which you can view via the PDF file within the game's files. But each unit has their own abilities and strengths and weaknesses when combating other various units, or in how they operate in the field of battle. But like other games in this genre, there will be units you will be able to use throughout the entire game. Then there are others that you would probably use once, mostly if your starting unit is in a mission and then you never use them again. These are the units you will more than likely command throughout the entire game. And regardless of their visuals, the sleek technological marvels of the NATO forces or the brutish yet simple design of the Soviet forces, they are all pretty much the same in terms of functionality and controls. All the way down to their offensive and defensive abilities. You've got your tanks of your light, medium and heavy varieties. Being your frontline units, you will probably use these units more than any other. Now obviously, they are quite useful against your structures and other vehicles, and depending on the tank you have deployed, have some sodomly heavy armor. But of course, they are vulnerable to garrisoned engineers and helicopters. Not garrisoned helicopters. Alongside them and acting in support, you have your APCs, or Armoured Personnel Carriers for your uneducated plebs. Though not as heavily armoured as your tanks, they can carry infantry to their destinations and relies on its speed and anti-tank rockets to defend itself. They are great against other light vehicles, infantry and tanks of the light and medium classes, if you have some hit and run tactics that is. They can shoot down helicopters too, so that's neato, but they are not very good against heavy tanks, obviously. Infantry garrisoned in buildings and attack helicopters. Artillery, the beasts of the battlefield, if kept out of the main battlefield and defended properly, have a very long range and can provide devastating fire support, with 3 classes ranging from light and medium to the apocalyptic heavy artillery. These units are quite slow when on the move and are very vulnerable to pretty much everything that is right in front of their grill. You have anti-air units, and as it says on the tin, they are effective against all air units only. Yeah, not really good against anything else really, but they are very good as a defensive unit. Now, Jeeps are very interesting for this game. They are one of the few multi-purpose units in the entire game that can do a myriad of useful things alongside the infantry. Though they have very little armor and cannot stand up against a tank without being burnt to bits, they are, for one, very quick, can carry infantry to and from areas of the battlefield. They have a machine gun, which is great against infantry and light helicopters. But with their special ability of using anti-armored bullets, they can have a slight fighting chance with hostile armor, but I wouldn't recommend it even then. Oh, and they can repair any vehicle unit, including helicopters, so be sure to have a few of these little heroes within your unit compositions. That, as well as the repair tanks. There is not much else to say really about those. Helicopters, another useful unit to have in the battlefield, if you can keep them out of range of anti-air fire. Composing of your scouts, who are quick but have very little armor, they are best used for recon and gunning down the poor bloody infantry. Then you have your mediums, slightly more armoured than your scout helicopters. They can at least stand toe-to-toe with other helicopters and can still gun down infantry with ease. Then you have your tank killers, your heavy helicopters, the true kings of the sky. Though they may be slow due to their heavy armour and weaponry, they are terrifyingly powerful when grouped into a hunter-killer pack and completely level structures and vehicles. Yet they are not so great against other helicopters and anti-air units, obviously. And finally, you have your poor bloody infantry. Though they may have a slightly diminished role compared to other tactics games, they still have their uses on the modern battlefield. There are 4 main infantry units available to command, and each one, like the many other units you can command, have their strengths, weaknesses, and abilities to make winning more possible. Firstly, you have your riflemen, also paratroopers via the tactical link. These are your average go-to infantry unit. These guys are mostly great against other infantry units, yet incredibly deadly when they are in cover, such as buildings or hidden in a forested area. But don't leave them in the open, for they will die very quickly. Or in a forest to go back to Napalm, which I've done before. Bloody hell. Same goes with the anti-tank infantry. They may be the same as your standard riflemen in terms of stats, but as the name says, they are better used against all types of vehicles. But put them in a structure or a forested area, they will become harbingers of the vehicle's doom. You will notice this as you play the game in the later levels. But they are very slow and easy targets for your riflemen and snipers. Speaking of snipers, they are extremely effective against all infantry units with their extreme range. Hide them in the woods and they will prove a bane to infantry. One shot and killing a unit with ease. But they are very vulnerable and a unit consists of 1 infantry unit, so if he dies, the unit dies. It's story time, my fellow subjects, so this bit will have quite a few spoilers. So for those who don't want to be spoiled, go to here. Got the memo? Well, let's get on with this, but first I want to say 2 things before moving on. Firstly, I will be reviewing the complete version of the World in Conflict game, which is now only available on GOG, which includes both the main game and the Soviet Assault DLC. And secondly, and I think this is something worth mentioning, the Soviets are not overly vilified. Knowing this certain trend in recent games, hell, even going as far back as the 1980s, this is a breath of fresh air for once. The Soviet scene in this game are seen as, rightfully so, as an equal compared to the NATO forces. So for one, they are not portrayed like this, or this.
Bowman! Bowman! You fucking son of a bitch!
The Soviet forces, just like any other army in the world, are full of villains, heroes, those who believe in what they are fighting for, or those simply caught up in following their orders. This game follows a what-if scenario for the Cold War. In an alternative 1989 to 1990, the Cold War finally erupts into World War III and, unlike most scenarios, devolves into conventional warfare. You know, troop movement and conventional weapons. But like any modern warfare setting ever, the threat of nuclear war is always there, hanging over the situation like the sword of Damocles. But of course, the historian part of my brain must raise an eyebrow in confusion here. 1989 was when the Cold War technically ended and tensions were at their lowest since the 70s, barring a few incidences here and there, and the USSR wasn't exactly the happiest union at this point in history. So, in the story, by 1988, the USSR acknowledges the economic downturn of the country and requests financial aid from the West, but this is denied. This seems to have left the entire Soviet bloc, and they all united to prepare for an all-or-nothing war. With tensions rising across the Iron Curtain, World War III was inevitable. And you get to start it. Wicked. Throughout the story, you will switch between the Soviet and NATO, mostly American forces, and take part in some significant battles within this fictionalized Third World War. and throughout the course of the game, you will be accompanied by a group of characters representative of each side. Some are cool, others you would wish dead, others you would probably see maybe once, then never see again, apart from that mission. And throughout the campaign, that would last about 10 hours, barring a few retries here and there, especially this mission, you'll see many changes with all the major characters. Taking on the persona of Lieutenant Romanov, you, as in he, under the command of Colonel Orlovsky, an almost fatherly and honourable figure, accompanied by a KGB stooge and friend Lebedev, start the Third World War. First, I eliminated the anti-air defences near the Reichstag using a Spetsnaz team. Then at dawn, or you could say, a Red Dawn, alongside the fervent communist and Orlovsky's nephew Malashenko, battled the NATO forces and take the 17th of June Street, as well as the entirety of Berlin for the first time since World War II. All seems well for the USSR's war effort. Then, 3 months later, the Soviet Union does the unthinkable, a semi-realistic invasion of the United States, by striking into Seattle and opening another front in the greater Third World War. Now taking on the persona of Parker, whose face is kind of obscured, but you'll kind of see what he might look like from other NPC models, and being accompanied by friends, fellow Washington National Guardsmen, and non-clones of the US Army.
I'm Mike and this is Anton, sir! Washington National Guard!
As well as the glory-hungry tank commander and moaning prick, Captain Bannon.
What? Who's in command then? What do you mean, I am?
Hey, Parker. I know you were the Colonel's pet, but you don't impress me worth a damn. We need some intel before we leave this quagmire, and I want you to gather it.
They aid each other and retreat out of Seattle whilst rescuing civilians, fellow troopers, and fighting the Soviet forces, whilst preventing the Soviets from breaking out of Washington state. He is then later joined with, and then under the overall command of Colonel Sawyer, a shrewd yet aggressive and high-risk commander, whom seemed to have beef with Banner, and former Ranger turned Commander Webb. And whilst the Soviets solidify their hold on the countryside and Malashenko becomes more pissed off and resorting to more barbaric tactics, the Americans win a substantial victory at the brutal and close-call Battle of Pine Valley with timely fire support from the USS Missouri. After this battle, both sides heal their wounds for a few more months. Then by Christmas 1989, the Soviets make a move eastwards towards Fort Teller. For the Americans, this is very alarming, as the Strategic Defensive Initiative, or the Star Wars project, is located there. But since they know it is a bust, but the Soviets do not, the Americans set about to defend a farce and to prevent the Soviets from figuring out that they could launch their nukes with no worry of interruption from the SDI. So as Parker and his team put up stiff resistance towards the Soviet advance towards Fort Teller, Romanov and his group deal with American insurgencies within their occupied territories.
Nobody had counted on the American civilians putting up such resistance. Everywhere we went, we were greeted with bullets, and our battalion had it easy. We had been tasked with pacifying the countryside, while 4 other regiments pushed into the mountains.
Wolverine!
By this point of the game, however, certain characters have definitely changed in a way. For the Soviets, Malashenko and Orlovsky are constantly disagreeing with each other over how to deal a decisive victory against the Americans. Orlovsky has a more noble and chivalrous attitude when fighting.
Not be privy to wholesale slaughter of civilians just so he can satiate his need for revenge.
It might work, though.
Valeri, no. They hate us enough already. We have the location of their camp. That's where we'll strike.
Whilst Malashenko wants to be more decisive by just wiping them out and killing all those who dare oppose them,
Then we should kill them all.
as well as constantly disagreeing with his uncle.
No distinction should be made. They are all enemies.
If we want your opinion on this matter, we will ask for it, Captain. Until then, you will observe radio discipline. I will not tell you again.
Infantry good to go. Whatever you say, Captain. Malashenko out.
For the Americans, Bannon becomes more competent and willing to redeem himself, and doesn't argue as much with Sawyer over tactical choices, compared to before.
Should have left earlier.
Shut up, Captain.
This all culminates with the Battle of Cascade Falls. Despite a heroic and hard-fought attempt by both sides, the Soviet numbers prove too much, and the Americans are forced to use a tactical nuclear strike to halt the Soviet advance. And Bannon redeems himself by sacrificing his tank battalion and holds off the Soviets until the bomb's detonation. We then go back a few months and return to Europe, more specifically France. So basically, the Soviets have managed to capture a vast majority of Germany, but both armies have come to a stalemate and can't push onward or move the front back. With this, the Soviets, having destroyed the US 6th Fleet in the Mediterranean, have landed an army near Marseille and threatened to encircle the NATO forces distracted in Germany. It is here Parker, Bannon, and their French liaison, Sabatier, must drive out the Soviet forces in France, commanding NATO units. It is also during this chapter of the game we see why Sawyer sees Bannon as an unreliable commander and a loose cannon, constantly disobeying orders.
Toward the bridges now!
Negative, Bannon. How many times do I have to tell you? You stay with the Commandant. Do you read me? Over.
The Commandant is doing fine, sir. My lead elements are almost at the bridges already.
Bannon, turn around and return to the Commandant. Bannon, come in.
Murdering, surrendering soldiers, and having Sabatier killed in one of the most difficult missions in the game.
Eagle 6 come in. They're all around us. Merde, it's an ambush. Mais on est perdu. C'est la...
Sawyer just grows increasingly infuriated with Bannon, but despite this, they eventually throw the Soviets out of France. Yet, due to the static front line in Europe, both sides resort to raids to drain the enemy's morale, as well as opening new fronts to hasten the war's conclusion. Romanov and the Soviets open a new air corridor in Norway after a fast and brutal raid opens targets in northern Europe to Soviet bombers, whilst Parker and his team in the northern USSR have to fight to destroy a shot-down stealth bomber and rescue their pilots, as well as to sabotage Soviet submarines after plans have been found of a potential strike on US shores. Although that was successful, 2 subs managed to escape due to Bannon's incompetence.
You goddamn cowboy!
For the final mission of this act, Parker and his team arrive back in the USA to thwart a Spetsnaz raid in New York. It is here you would command a few Apache and Cobra attack helicopters and help a chalk of Rangers to rescue soldiers and prominent officials whilst fighting the Spetsnaz using US Army equipment in one of the most overstocked armies I have ever seen. Even the Rangers commander picks this up.
How many vehicles did we have stationed here? This is insane! They must have planned to defend against the whole Red Army. The Russians are having a field day with our stuff.
But after the successful conclusion to the mission, everything pretty much comes full circle. Bannon is sent to Seattle as punishment for his actions in Europe, Parker gets leave back home, which is in Seattle, and everything is sweet and dandy. For about 2 weeks. Now returning to the present, the situation on the American front has changed. Despite the use of a nuclear weapon on Cascade Falls, the initiative has fallen to the Americans, with the Soviets reeling from this unconventional action. After regrouping with Webb and reforming your forces using whatever vehicles are salvageable, being a mixture of Soviet and American tanks, APCs, support vehicles and artillery platforms, and wiping out the remnants of this Soviet Cascade Falls attack group, the American forces advance towards Seattle and seek to remove the Soviets from American soil. Meanwhile, the situation for Romanov's army group has degraded.
There is no room for the truth on that machine.
That's a dangerous word, Volodya. Truth. Such an ambiguous concept.
Stop it, Valery. We are defeated here. I know it and you know it too.
With many wounded, Orlovsky has ordered his army group to return home, but the rifts within have finally reached boiling point. While Romanov does what he can to defend the retreating convoy with his hind gunships, Malyshenko, seeing his uncle's actions as treasonous, kills him. Lebedev, having been a fence-sitter during this entire interpersonal conflict, finally takes over command of the army group and successfully defends the convoy against a vicious American counterattack, while Malyshenko moves on towards his fate in Seattle. This would be the last time he would take command of the Soviets. Meanwhile, the war for the NATO side takes a dire turn for the worst when the People's Republic of China enters the Third World War as an ally of the Soviet Union. Now with a massive navy and army steaming towards the Soviet beachhead in Seattle, it is now imperative for the Americans to retake the city before a massive Chinese army makes the American front a deadlier war zone. And to add to the tension, like a sword of Damocles, the President has ordered all US forces to retake Seattle at all costs. If they fail, the city will be nuked, making the destruction of Cascade Falls look like a roadside picnic in comparison. This has a profound effect on Sawyer and Webb. Sawyer becomes more willing to make risky maneuvers and becomes more aggressive to reach Seattle.
Get a move on! Seattle is lost if we don't break through today. I will not accept another Cascade Falls.
Whereas Webb is more cautious and concerned about the lives of his troops. So, with that, the US forces fight with all their worth against a well-entrenched and disciplined force. And with the fate of the city in jeopardy, both forces fight with everything they must to get Seattle into their hands. But But the American forces, with desperation and an all-or-nothing attitude, the Americans finally smashed the many Soviet counterattacks, barged their way to the harbour, destroyed the Soviet base and smashed the final counterattack to finally win Seattle back with many heavy casualties. But the war is far from over, and we may be recalled to fight again. And we have been waiting for 12 years. Oh well, at least Mike and Anton finally get batteries for their portable CD player. Yay! So, do I recommend this game? Abso-frickin-lutely. In fact, I will go as far as to say this is one of my favourite games of all time, and is one of the greatest strategy games ever made that should stand proudly next to other more prominent strategy games of today. This is pretty much a near-perfect game, with its very detailed graphics, its fast-paced and challenging gameplay, and the oh-so-satisfying use of the tactical aids that turns the battlefield into a pyrotechnical spectacle. Yeah, and there may be a few hiccups here and there, crappy pathfinding from your units as well as the AI, voice acting dropping the ball at different scenes, and the story is okay at best. But this is a game I will always return to every so often, and every time I enjoy every minute of it. So for me, this is an easy recommendation. And since this game is cheap to get on GOG with the complete bundle, it's completely worth it. Anyways, this is the end of another review. I hope you enjoyed all of this, and stay tuned for the next review. I think I might do a zombie game next. Which one? I'll let you figure it out. Anyways, thanks for watching, and have a good one.